we're recording. Lori, if you could start that slide over, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So hi, everyone. We're going to talk first about the timeline, or what we sometimes refer to as the phases of redistricting, so that you can understand how redistricting works and how you can plan the work for engaging your community. There's so much redistricting happening at all levels of government. Today, we're going to focus on local, but I wanted to give you an overview of the various types of redistricting happening. At the state level, there is an independent commission that is responsible for drawing the Assembly, the Senate, the Board of Equalization districts, as well as the congressional districts, which this year is exciting because we're going from 54 to 53. So it's almost like starting over. And then you have local jurisdictions at all levels doing redistricting. County boards of supervisors, every county has, under state law, has districts, and is required to adjust those boundaries. Most historically, counties did that. The Board of Supervisors did it themselves. The politicians drew their own districts. This year, we have 3 counties that are doing it by independent commission. That's Santa Barbara, San Diego, and Los Angeles County. The remaining counties are still doing it the old way. Some cities and school boards have districts, some do not. Some still elect their representatives at large, but many were doing it by district, but hundreds converted over the last decade to districts, and many of them will be redistricting for the first time. And then we have a lot of special districts too, which are water districts, utility districts, community college districts, things like that, that also have converted to district elections and are going through a redistricting process. And so today we want to focus on that local. There's been a lot of information out there and a lot of groups that can support engagement in state redistricting, but we're finding that the local is where folks need a lot of help. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm ready for my next slide. So first, I just want to talk about the phases of redistricting from the perspective of what the redistricting body should be doing, whether that is an independent commission, or whether it's a city council, a county board of supervisors, or a school district that's doing it themselves. And kind of, first of all, I want to say, the state process started a while ago, and oftentimes when there are independent commissions, they get started earlier. But it's pretty normal for local jurisdictions to be starting a little bit later in the process, and many of them are just gearing up right now. But if they're not, they should be. And this year, it's really exciting because in the past, local jurisdictions were able to often just kind of skate under the radar and do redistricting kind of behind closed doors, do one, they were required by law to do a couple hearings, but there was not much else they were required to do, and they could come in with a map and vote on it, and the process was done. But over the last several years, there's been a lot of work done, led by Common Cause, to reform the election code so that there are now these requirements for all local jurisdictions that ensure transparency and accessibility so that the public can engage in the process. And Jonathan is going to go over some of those requirements later, and he'll talk about that. But right now, I just want to break it down into kind of these 3 phases that should be happening. The first phase is the planning and outreach, which should be happening now, and jurisdictions should be, because they're required by law to establish a website. They need to set up a timeline and a hearing schedule and make sure the public knows about that. And they should be determining who's going to draw the lines. Some local jurisdictions may do that themselves, but it's always a good idea for them to hire a consultant or a formal line drawer. So it's just something to monitor as you're watching the process unfold, whether they're lining up the people they need to help them draw district lines. And in phase 2, they're going to shift to community of interest testimony, because for the first time ever, they're supposed to listen to communities and understand what communities of interest are in their jurisdiction. And that should be happening as soon as now and really through September. And they're required to do at least one, but ideally they would do more public hearings to hear from the public. And in addition, they really should be doing Voting Rights Act analysis too, to make sure they're complying with federal law. Jonathan will talk a little bit more about that as well later this afternoon. And then phase 3 is when they start drawing their lines. They're not allowed to start drawing their lines until they get the census data, which is still on target to be released on August 16th. But they're required to use what we call in California state adjusted data, because the state does some tweaking of the data and does some adjustments for prison populations. And so they use that data to start drawing their maps. Ideally, they're not supposed to post those draft maps for a few weeks so that the public has a chance to weigh in. And then the public is supposed to have the chance to weigh in on the draft maps and provide input on those maps. So that's what they would be doing in that last phase. And most jurisdictions have to wrap up their redistricting by December 15th or end of December. There are some jurisdictions that if they don't have, there are quite a few cities, for example, that if they don't have a primary in June, their deadline is later. Okay, I'm ready for the next slide. And then the real question is, so knowing those 3 phases, what can organizations do to help, engage community? And how do you sort of plan and engage in each of those phases? And so, the first phase is really similar to what the cities should be doing is outreach and education. You should be doing outreach and education to community. The first step is to check in on your local jurisdiction's planning and timeline and where they are in the process. And a good step is to call the clerk or a local official who may be able to share that. If you can't get that information, Common Cause can also help you kind of root out that information. So check with your local officials, but if you need support, please reach out to Common Cause, because we have great folks monitoring local redistricting processes. So once you figure that out, it's really good to then start engaging the community in both Redistricting 101, kind of what is redistricting? Most people don't know what it is. It comes around every 10 years. It's really esoteric and kind of confusing. But once people understand what redistricting is and the impact it has on their lives, they get really excited and engaged, and people just scramble up the learning curve and can dive right into figuring out how to map their community. And so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are lots of Redistricting 101 presentations out there, as well as community mapping tools that you can use to help community map their community, and lots of ways to submit those electronically or via testimony to a commission. And that's what Janine from PANA is going to present on right after I'm done, is how do you actually do that? How do you engage your community and draw a community of interest? But you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And the Common Cause website, and those links will be shared, has lots of resources for you that you can adapt for your purposes. So the other thing, just before we move on, is as you're doing that, it's also always a good idea, and I know lots of you are working in coalition with other partners, and to just consider coordinating your communities of interest or discussing those with other community partners, because there can be a lot of overlap. Sometimes they can conflict. Like, how do you want to coordinate and present those with other groups potentially, and opening the dialogue? And, you'll hear some folks use the term unity mapping. That's a much more involved process, but that can also happen at the local level. But just, communicating with partners and understanding where their communities of interest are and how they complement or conflict with yours can be a really great way to consider how to present those to either the redistricting body or commission that's doing the line drawing. Okay, the next slide. So once you've hosted, maybe you get out there and you're talking to folks, or some folks are sending surveys out to community to determine what are communities of interest and figuring out ways to map that. Then you have to figure out how do you get that before the city council, the county board of supervisors, the school board, or the independent commission. So there are a few things that you can do. You want to help community, you map those communities of interest, maybe using some of the tools that are out there. You also want to help community members with the way they're going to present that. And there are lots of strategies for that, so there are kind of 2 pieces. One is good old fashioned turnout strategies, but how do you prepare the folks who are turning out with written testimony? Good idea can be to watch good examples of community of interest testimony and how people have presented those, and Common Cause has posted an example on its website of some testimony that was given to the State Commission recently that was really great in terms of how someone described their community of interest. It's really important for line drawer, the people who are drawing the lines, to not only understand why it's a community of interest, but also have the geography of that, right? So it's like, I can tell you what I have in common with my community and why it's important, but they also want to know which street is it bounded by on the left side, on the north, the east, and the south, right? So making sure both of those, you can do both of those. And Janine will talk about how PAN has been doing that with lots of different groups. And the other thing that you may want to consider is how are you going to present? If you have 50 people presenting on the same community of interest, you may want to think about, do you want those folks to be able to present like 50 people in a row, or do you want to potentially think about a group presentation? Or if you've drawn a whole map for the jurisdiction, there's precedent certainly before the State Commission of having a more, requesting time for a more formal presentation where you have community members talking, and you also have the person who helped you draw the map talk about why they drew the districts the way they did. So that's something to think about. And if you have, questions about that, Common Cause is working with lots of groups who are trying to think about the best practices for doing that. But certainly engaging with whatever body is doing the redistricting and flagging for them that there might be an interest in a group presentation, and that can be helpful to a commission or a city council or a school board to hear a more coordinated presentation, because then they don't have to sort through a bunch of different testimony and figure out what's what. So it can be beneficial to them as well. And then also, you may want to, during this phase, consider communication strategies. And this carries over into phase 3 as well. But, there might be value in talking to the press about what you're doing and why it's important, and what your plans are for engaging a commission or a local redistricting body, and making sure they're paying attention, and holding the local jurisdiction accountable, or uplifting your community of interest that you're trying to highlight. So encourage you to explore that as well. So I'm ready for the next slide. So phase 3 is really where things start to, the wheels hit the road. Once a commission or a city has posted, right, they start to do the line drawing, right? You want to engage the community in looking at those maps and seeing, do those boundaries split my community, or do they keep it together? And either way, you probably want to turn out and either say, thank you for keeping my community together, or, hey, our community split, can you please move the line, to keep us together? And, the strategies here are really interesting because, and of course, again, coordinating that with partners too, right? And making sure that your advocacy is complementary to theirs. But one of the things that we've seen in redistricting over the years, and Jonathan's seen this at a lot of the local work he's done, as have I, is it's like what's the phrase? The squeaky wheel gets the grease. But you really, turning out and showing up can really have an influence even later in the process. So once a draft map goes up, even if it's like, oh, great, this is, here's the map, it split our community, what are we going to do? Showing up and fighting for your community really works in this context. And line drawers listen to community. The commissions certainly will listen to community, and local jurisdictions will too. Even the most skeptical, folks will say, no, those politicians are drawing the lines the way they want to draw it. It's still worth showing up, engaging the press, and putting pressure to fight to keep your community together. So those are some of the strategies that you can use. One last thing that I want to just mention is that it's really line drawers who are hired by cities or commissions, their job is to listen to the public too. So making sure that you're engaging in whatever opportunities the line drawers present. Some of them are responsible for doing outreach or doing workshops in the community, and making sure you introduce yourselves to those line drawers and let them know who your community is, so that you can be available if they have questions as they're drawing a map and they say, oh, which organization was asking for this? I'm going to reach out to them and make sure I'm getting this right. Don't be afraid to engage in that way as well, within the bounds of, of the fairness requirements and the transparency requirements of the jurisdiction. So, and that's the end of my slides. And I think, do we still have time for questions?
We do. We have a number of questions for you, Lori, or questions for all of us that we can all answer together. First, Luis asked, will this PowerPoint be made available after the training? Yes, it definitely will. We have a hub of resources, commoncause.org/local redistricting 2021, that will go into greater depth later, but we'll put this PowerPoint and this recording there. Paulette asked basically a question about how do people get engaged and get started, Lori, when the census numbers won't come out until really late this year. And so you don't know the census data about your community. How are you supposed to get started if you don't know that yet? Can you take that?
Yeah, of course. So the census data, first of all, the census data, I saw December there, but the census data, excuse me, is still, it's been a crazy year. Anything could happen, but it's still, and as of yesterday, the Census Bureau again confirmed that they're on target to release the census data on August 16th, and it will be ready for use in California it should be ready by mid-September for everyone, right? So, and so that data will be there. And so if you're working with someone who has experience with that, or with a tool that's going to upload that data, that should be ready by mid-September. And local jurisdictions are not supposed to draw their first draft maps, if that's the timeline, for 3 weeks after. Okay, for 3 weeks after that data is posted. So you have time to look at that data. If you're looking at specific districts, right? That's where the census data can become really critical. But if you're looking at your community of interest and just defining your community and wanting to keep it together, that doesn't hinge on census data. In fact, a lot of communities, and you'll hear this from PANA, don't show up in the census data necessarily. And so just going before a commission and defining your community of interest is really important. And the state law now requires the jurisdiction to consider communities of interest. So yes, equal population using the census data is important. Voting Rights Act compliance is important, and that's and that is connected to census data as well. But communities of interest is also a criteria, and that's not tied to census data. That's tied to how you define your community. So showing up and letting them know what your community of interest is really critical and can happen before you have the census data. Jonathan, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't. That was great, and it's time for us to move to Janine, so I'm going to just answer a couple of quick questions. One was, Neil asked, what was the example of community of interest testimony given by a community? There are 2 examples of community of interest testimony were given to the State Redistricting Commission at an early hearing that were really good, and so we clipped them. Actually, Amy is on this call. She was the one who gave us the heads up on this. We clipped them and put them on our website, which we've put in the chat a couple times now. And so you can see examples of good community of interest testimony in that short 3-minute public comment format. And then there was a plea in the chat for folks in Los Angeles to contact Districtor and let them know to add Los Angeles City Council districts and LAUSD to their platform. Districtor can be used by anyone in any jurisdiction to draw community of interest. But if you want additional data about the political districts in a jurisdiction layered on top, sometimes you have to contact Districtor to ask them to do that. We're going to go into greater depth about Districtor later. We have a whole demo on that. But you can use the request form at the bottom of their website, on the bottom of their homepage, to make that request. Or you can email them at districtor@mggg.org. And I'm going to ask Jose to put that email address in the chat. And then,
Jonathan, some folks may not know what Can he explain what political data is in his presentation? Because some folks may not understand what that means.
Yeah, Jose, let's put a pin in that and make sure that you return to that in your demonstration. That would be great. Okay, and then we have a question about why some districts are much less populous than others. That's a longer conversation, but I can try to tackle it in my presentation that comes after the break. At this point, though, we are going to move on to our next presenter, who is Janine. If we go to the next slide, perfect, thank you. Our next presenter is Janine Erkat. Janine is a policy associate at the Partnership for the Advancement of New Americans, PANA, one of our co-hosts for today. As a policy associate at PANA, Janine leads PANA's community listening sessions, advocacy campaigns, redistricting efforts, and engages the community in PANA's policy priorities to fight for the economic, social, and civic inclusion of refugee and immigrant communities. Janine also dedicates free time to working for the Majdal Community Center in El Cajon, a grassroots, locally driven institution committed to uplifting the Arab community in San Diego. Janine is going to demonstrate how to put together community of interest testimony, or COI testimony, or COI testimony, how to host a COI workshop, how to prepare your community to testify in front of a commission or a line drawing body. Janine, thank you so much for joining us, and take it away.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks, everyone, for being here. And thank you, Lori, for that in-depth overview. Like Jonathan said, my name is Janine Erkat, Policy Associate at PANA. At PANA, we work at the intersection of African, Middle Eastern, Muslim, South Asian, or AMEMSA refugee communities. And over the past 3 months, we've hosted 9 COI sessions with 200 residents, both virtually and in person at parks, local mosques, and community centers in 6 languages: English, Somali, Oromo, Swahili, Arabic, and Dari Pashto, with youth and elders so our community members could effectively engage in the process in their preferred language. So I'm here today to talk about how our experience went and how right now we're preparing the community to give testimony. Next slide, please. So I'm going to keep it brief. I'm going to go over how to host a COI workshop based on our experience, how we're preparing community testimony, and what's an example of a COI testimony. Next slide, please. So the first thing to really take in mind and what worked really well for us is to really be flexible and to assess the technological and cultural and linguistic needs of your community. So what I mean by that is that in the past year, we've all adapted to life on Zoom, but it's not easy for everyone. We've seen that it works really well with our youth. So we've done 2 youth sessions on Zoom, and it works really well, where I can give a presentation on redistricting using the resources from Common Cause. And then I put our youth into breakout rooms, and they fill out this Jamboard, which I screenshotted below, where I ask them a series of questions for them to fill out. And our youth are better with technology than me and really enjoy doing the Jamboard activity. They're really familiar with it, lets them answer questions at the pace that they like. Some of the questions that we ask them are, how would you describe where your community is? Where are the boundaries? What are the main streets, landmarks? What school do you go to? What school do your siblings go to? And then, like, what are your shared interests? What do community members have in common? What unites the community? What brings you together? And then we ask them to name their community. And these questions are really pulled from the statewide mapping tool, Draw My California Community, or CA Community, which is really user-friendly and is translated in the top 12 languages of the state. And so usually we'll bring them back and we have them share out. And while they share out their experience, I pull up the statewide mapping tool and I start mapping it while they're talking so they can really visualize the map, and it starts to click in ways that maybe they weren't familiar with it. And I've also done this with, another way that you can do this is, instead of having people fill out the Jamboard, is I've been filling it out while people share out, and that's worked with some of our older community members or when we're short on time. And really, for some of our community members, we recognize it'd be more fruitful discussion and experience if we did it in person. So we chose parks that the community frequented, and it was often, and for this picture on the session, this picture on the slide was from our Somali session. It was extremely successful, and the outreach was because of my colleague Rahmo, who got 49 people to show up. she picked the park that was right across from a major apartment complex, and we had people coming through. And, you know, as soon as someone came, we'd say, hey, text your neighbor, tell them to come, it'll take 5 minutes, you know. And we were able to work with Sandag, which is our local mapping tool in San Diego, and ask them to print maps that were really region specific. And we printed them on these big foam boards, and we had people pin where they live, where their kids go to school, where they shop. And at the end, we like tied this red string to really show them where their community is. And in these sessions where they were dedicated COI sessions, we really had in-depth conversations with community members and really talked through all of it. But we also did what we call like pop-up stands. So I went last week to the mosque after Friday prayer, and as people are coming in, we ask them to pin where they live, or I use the Districtor app. So really using all the tools out there. You can get different things from the different tools. So don't be afraid to use different mapping tools or physical or online combo. And it was a really great way to get community members together in one room. And it's something that we continue to do. Just last Friday, we had a youth social with the Masjid Center, and we, as people were signing in, we had them mark where they live before they could even get to the food. So it's just a quick way to start having a conversation and then connecting it to it. And I really want to highlight the linguistic needs of your community and the base that you work with. For us at PANA, we serve over 9 languages, and we have staff members who speak a variety of languages. So for us, it was really important. And we knew that one of the reasons why our community hasn't been so involved is because none of them, like the materials aren't ever translated. So we really worked really hard to translate everything in the 6 languages. Both physical, written translation and interpretation, and having community members who speak the language really lead our mapping sessions. And one of the important things also here is to really cater it to the community's needs. So we serve a large community, a very diverse community that has different interests. For our East African community, they've been here for 30 years, as well as parts of our Arab community. And we were really successful in registering them to vote in the past election cycle. And so for them, we really focused this on an opportunity for language access and getting political representation, because we don't have that great of a language access for our specifically communities PANA serve, because we don't show up in the data. So that kind of hits on that question earlier, and that's why we see the COI session so important, because we know we can show up without having to have the numbers. But for some of our recent arrivals from Syria, from Afghanistan, who came, they're now coming up on 5 years, and they're still they're applying for citizenship right now. And so what that means is they've never voted, and they've never really been engaged in the process, and they don't really feel like they have a role in the electoral process yet, because they're not US citizens. But what they do care about is resources, and how redistricting and having lines and being unified can later lead to more resources within the community. And another really big issue is a lot of this youth and students that we work with face a lot of Islamophobia in school. And so we really connected it to the parents and saying, you know, when you have elected officials and people who you can hold accountable, even if you can't vote just yet, you can make all these changes within your community. And so that really made our sessions really successful. And again, just really emphasizing being flexible. You know your community best, and sometimes the way that the material is presented by a commission isn't the way that your community is going to understand it, or even the best way that it makes sense for them. Next slide, please. Now, the other thing next things is how to prepare community testimony. So actually for us in San Diego, one of the cities that has a really high number of our recent refugee arrivals from Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and also older people who have been here longer is the city of El Cajon. Now, the city of El Cajon, they don't use the state commission. Their redistricting is done by their city council. And they announced 2 weeks ago that their first public hearing is tomorrow. So we had a really quick turnaround, and we actually held our first community testimonial session yesterday. And I want to share a little bit of what I think went well, and maybe things that we reflected on what we could do better. So for our session also last night that we did hold over Zoom, we had 2 different breakout rooms by language, one in English, one in Arabic, so that community members, and we worked ahead of time with the City Council staff to make sure that interpretation for our community would be made available, to again, really encourage community members to speak in their preferred language as required by law. It's one of the election codes laws in El Cajon. And so some of the guiding questions when we frame this, and this is all pulled from a Common Cause worksheet that's linked below that I know Jose is going to send out, and you can also find on the website, is imagine describing your community to a friend who wants to move there, or we'd say, imagine what was your experience when you first moved to El Cajon as an immigrant, as a refugee? What are the things that caught your attention or what kept you there? Who lives in your community? What does your community do? What kind of housing is common? With our youth, I said, what's the first type of food that you think of when you're in El Cajon? What school do you go to? Immigration history, language spoken, all of these things that really connect the community that I think people overlook and don't realize how important it is to tell city council or the commissions, even if they're from your area, because they have a really different experience. Next slide. And I just wanted to share really the sample outline for how we went through explaining this to community. For a lot of our community members, it was the first time that they've ever given testimony or made public comment at a city council meeting or a hearing or any public meeting like that. And so we knew it was a really daunting experience for a lot of folks. And so we did do a brief overview on redistricting, again, just reiterating it for community members, like to get that buy-in on why is it so important for us to show up tomorrow and talk to city council, and walking them through, your introduction, just things that maybe those of us who are more familiar with giving public comment or comfortable kind of overlook, talking them through how do you give what's your name, saying thank you to the commission, talking about this is your first meeting that you've attended, giving your name, your last name. What are the streets you live in El Cajon? And this is something I think Lori really highlighted on that we're still working with, and we want to have a follow-up session with community about, is the geographic description. It's still something that I think doesn't come as naturally as being able to talk about how long you've been living in El Cajon or the characteristics, but we're getting there. I think what really was able to ground them is having people share, what school do your kids go to, or what school do you go to, or what school did you go to when you were living in El Cajon if you've lived here your whole life, and trying to get them more comfortable with sharing their streets, the major landmarks. I think we're going to find out tomorrow what was successful in testimony and what wasn't. And if I know a lot of the community is more comfortable sharing, the major landmarks as opposed to the specific street that they live on. And then again, for how long you've been living in El Cajon, for our community who has that history of migration, sharing about, when you immigrated to the US and California, San Diego, if you've been in El Cajon for 5 years, why'd you stay in El Cajon? Was it the affordable housing? Was it that you knew that you could find your resources in your preferred language? Is it that you felt like you had a community here? What was your experience upon arrival, right? And really describing, again, like the ethnicity, the socioeconomic status, holidays. And we've really been encouraging community to really be honest about their story and their experience. There's no perfect testimony. And I think for a lot of us who are engaging communities, this is their first time. The best advice is just to get them to start writing and share out and test it for themselves. And then it can be more of a fine tuning for the next one. We have a lot of different, I know there's like different hearings and timelines for us in the city of El Cajon specifically. Tomorrow is our first of 4 sessions where people can come out and speak. And then in our county level, we have, I think, about 7 or 6 or 7. So we're also using this because it's a learning curve for all of us that we haven't been here. This only happens every 10 years. And then the why are you uplifting your community? I think this is probably one of the most important things to really emphasize with the community members that you're speaking to is to really share, why is it that you care? Something I said yesterday is some of you had to have cared from the first time you heard me when I invited you to this session to show up on a Monday night when you could be doing other things. So what is it that brought you here? What stuck with you? Why do you want to share about it? And I actually had someone ask for when even describing the community was, do you want us to talk about the issues that we have, or do you want us to talk about what we aspire our community to look like? And my response to that was both. This is an opportunity for you to say as much as you can about to the commission about what is it that your community is currently facing. And you're here today because of what you want to aspire to see in your community, right? And lastly, just restating how important it is to protect community and why you want to stay together. And again, simple things like saying thank you that I think may be intuitive to some of us who are used to it, but really walking this through. In our session, we had people share out and do testimony. And because we're a tight-knit community, we've been spending, myself and others who facilitated yesterday have spent today texting, calling community members saying, hey, do you want me to look over your script? I can help you, we can practice. And we're also planning on meeting earlier tomorrow before the session to really give people another chance to practice in a space that they feel comfortable. Next slide, please. And this here is an example actually from the video that's on the Common Cause website. I think this is something that you would expect out of a COI session that maybe isn't as natural to our community. I can read parts of it really quickly and also encourage you all to read it. We had hoped to share the video, so it's less talking today, but we had technical difficulties. So, this example is, my name is John Resident. I live in Ahwahnee, California, up in the foothills towards Yosemite. We represent Congressional District Number 4, Assembly State District 5, and State Senate District 8. As a mountain area residents and businesses, we've incorporated unique culture, much different than the unincorporated cities of the urban area of the Bay Area, the coastal regions, et cetera, et cetera. So really here in this second paragraph, you can see that it's really honing in on the geography before going into the major issues like having the forest management, the problems with the fire, and what they want out of this, right? In the next paragraph, we don't want representatives from large metropolis areas who don't understand water storage. And lastly, again, them in this closing, just really closing out what districts they're in and what this means to them. And again, a lot of this can be pulled from the worksheet on Common Cause's website that I encourage you all to rely on, even using your own testimony, get comfortable. For us, we translated that worksheet into Arabic, so our community members felt comfortable using it, and as well as Oromo and Somali. And I will finish here for questions.
Jonathan, we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Thank you for that, Lori. Janine, that was fantastic. I appreciate it very much. We have a ton of questions for you. I'm going to start with one from Neil. Outside of your example of standing outside the mosque, what were other mobilizing tactics that you used to get people to show up to the preparatory sessions?
Yeah, so I mean, one was just something that we did was like, hey, we're having this community picnic at the park. Come get food, get tea, hang out with us, and getting people to bring community out, like literally just like, come bring your neighbors, come over here. We know you have something going on later today, but just stop and talk to us. And when we got them there was doing the maps, right? Like I said, we went to the youth session, we went to the community centers where we know people are at, we brought our tablets, we brought these huge maps and getting people there. A lot of it, that we use to get people into the mobilizing tactics, or what I'm sure a lot of you use in organizing, doing the one-on-one phone calls with community members, telling them this is happening, them getting them started, inviting them to the session. I think you probably know your community best on where people congregate. I will say it was actually easier to get people to come in person than it was on Zoom, because I think Zoom is really formal and people don't want to turn on their cameras. It's not as exciting. Whereas when they knew it was inside, we really framed it as like a social And once we got them there, we did our whole spiel about redistricting. And it's also less formal in that we didn't have a presentation when we were at the park, but as each person came, we would give our little, this is what redistricting is, and it's so important. And like, tell me, like, you know, that this issue is our community is facing. I think something that is really important is using trusted messengers in the community to get people to show up and start having these conversations, and plugging them in certain ways. Jonathan, we can't hear you again.
I keep doing that. I'm so sorry. It's that double, when you're using your phone, you've got the double mute problem on Zoom. Maybe some people know what I'm talking about. So we have, there was a question for, people really liked your outline, Janine, of community of interest testimony. There's an ask if we can have it in Spanish. I'll just note that, first of all, we would be happy to make that slide in Spanish and distribute it or post it on our website. I will say we have on our website a template for community of interest testimony that is relatively similar, and it's in English and in Spanish already. I will just note that WordPress is evidently issuing an update today, and WordPress runs our website. So I'm having trouble clicking on some of the links on our website. So we're out here right now pumping our website over and over and over and telling you to go check out the resources on our website. And then I'm getting 404 messages when I try to actually do that. So I am very sorry that that's happening, but evidently it's a WordPress issue. If you could just bookmark that page, and you can go to it, presumably by tomorrow, it will be back up and running. Let's see here. Janine, did you have anything you wanted to add to that, the question of creating that outline in Spanish?
No, I mean, just that it's like to cater it to what makes sense for your community and how you want to frame it, I think is really helpful in sitting back. That the Common Cause worksheet is a really great starting point. And I should say something I forgot is in our testimony, I did have a script ready that we created in this toolkit. So telling people, you know, I want you to personalize it as much as you want, but here are just some general talking points that you can use to describe it. Yeah, that's all I had to say about that one.
So there was a question from Linda, which is the commissions that in her community, and hi, Linda, it's great to see you. The commissions in her community, and this is true of city councils or county boards of supervisors, say that they want data to support defining a community of interest. But the census, as we talked about just a moment ago, Lori was talking about this during her presentation, census data is not yet available. So what is the data that that community members and community organizations are supposed to submit with their COI testimony to strengthen that COI testimony? And Janine, why don't you go first and then I'll go second?
Yeah, that's a great question, Linda, and something that we were asked at one of our sessions, actually, to be completely honest, because my community, like the Arab community and other communities within the AMEMSA group, we know we don't show up in the numbers, and our census data isn't helping us. We sometimes show up in the ACS data when they do language spoken at home, but we know there's a huge undercount. So for us, we don't think about the data in that way. We've been really transparent and straight up with the commissions when we've mentioned that. That for us, we're telling you where people live. We're going to the community. We're asking them to pinpoint exactly where they live, and the community is showing up to reinforce that. Of course, we know, and I know that the census data is a huge part of that, and we've been relaying that with the commission, but also asking them to see that the census data is flawed in its collection, and that by law, and I know Jonathan will have more to add for this, that they do have to accept community of interest testimony, and they don't necessarily need the data to accept the community of interest testimony. I think for some of the commissioners, it's really daunting. This is their first time in this process and having this responsibility, so they think they're really reliant on the data. And for us, you know, we are a community organization that works on advocacy. We've been pushing back against that. Because we know if we relied on the census data, a lot of our community is going to be left out like they were 10 years ago.
I'll also just add that you can strengthen your community of interest testimony by adding, you know, what we might call community expertise or community data. Folks can say there are more renters in our community, or our neighborhood hasn't had sidewalks or streetlights since 1991. Or you can say it's a lower income community. There's always had fewer city services. Our parks have always not had the lighting they needed, despite the fact that we've advocated for decades. That's a data of its own kind. That's community data, right? That comes up out of people's lived experiences, and that matters. The other thing you can do if you want to use data in a more conventional approach is you can go to there's something called the American Community Survey, which a lot of people on this call probably are familiar with. The American Community Survey is like, for lack of a better term, like a mini census issued by the Census Bureau every year to a smaller subsection of Americans, not every single person. And it provides information about the income level in a neighborhood, or the educational attainment levels in a neighborhood, or the rate of renters or homeowners in a neighborhood, and so on and so forth. And the census's website, I put it in the chat. You can go find ACS data about your city or about your community or about your neighborhood at data.census.gov. Okay, so if you wanted to go dig around in there to find data, you can, and that's available on an ongoing basis, not just when the census finally releases its data later this fall. Okay, let's see here. Other questions? I think we want to use this opportunity. Lori, can I ask you to come back on? It sounds like there was something that you, oh, great, Valerie, great point in the chat, that you can also use public health data or schools data, right? There's other data sources out there that you can use other than just the Census Bureau. Lori, I'm going to have you come back on to add one thing from your presentation, and then we are going to head into a break at 12:55.
Yeah, I just wanted, it's something I meant to mention and I didn't, and it kind of tees up what Jose will be talking about in terms of mapping tools. But because of the new state law, the local jurisdictions should really be starting with a blank slate, right? They shouldn't be, but their instinct may be, oh, we'll just tweak boundaries based on population adjustments, or work with the prior districts and make a few minor adjustments based on who moved and whatever. But because of community of interest testimony being a new criteria that they're supposed to consider, and their existing maps aren't based on that, this is really an opportunity to start from scratch. And communities should really be pushing for that and looking creatively at the ways in which they can map their community and map the political boundaries in ways that can build power for the future. So I just wanted to flag that, because you'll see jurisdictions who are going to be tempted to say, okay, there are 1,000 more people here, we'll move this line here, when in fact they should be looking, and really their building blocks for any map should be communities of interest.
Right, and so we've already,
maybe voting rights districts too, depending on the jurisdiction.
We've already seen county supervisors and city council members saying from the dais, we're not going to move our district lines all that much. We're probably going to keep them the same, but we'll adjust here or there for population change. The fact of the matter is those district lines 10 years ago were not drawn with communities of interest in mind, and communities of interest are now a top criteria in drawing districts at the city and county levels. And so to Lori's point, you really kind of have to start from scratch and draw the new districts based on a variety of factors and criteria, but communities of interest right at the top. Okay, with that, we are going to head into a break. Please join us again right at 1 o'clock, and we'll go into our second hour. Thanks so much.
I want to say, someone just joined, and I just want to make sure people know that we're just on a break right now, and we'll be back in a few minutes.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our second hour. We have a lot more to get to, and we're happy you're still with us. Thanks for hanging in. Our next presenter is Jose Del Rio III. Jose is the local redistricting advocate for California Common Cause and a native of Los Angeles, California. After obtaining his JD from USC Gould School of Law in 2019, Jose worked at the Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles, fighting for student debt relief for low-income and financially distressed student loan borrowers. While in law school, Jose was a fellow at MALDEF. In a past life, Jose was a community organizer with Organizing for Action, where he specialized in organizing in underserved and underrepresented populations. Jose will walk us through some of the free online mapping tools available to the public for redistricting, which can help community-based organizations strategize and can help community members strengthen their testimony. Jose, take it away.
Perfect. Thank you, Jonathan. So we just heard about how, well, actually, let me start by saying good morning or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jose with California Common Cause. So thanks to Janine and Jonathan and Lori and all the presenters who came before me. We now know what COI or communities of interest testimony is, how to give it, how to help others prepare for it, and how to prepare workshops for it. And if you could go to the next slide as well. But how do we as organizers, as grass tops, as community leaders, or even members of the public inform redistricting commissions about what our communities of interest look like and how we define or organize them? Well, this is where the free mapping apps listed on your screen come in. They allow people to literally draw their communities and give a visual flair to their COI testimony. So why don't I show you? I'm gonna go ahead and screen share, assuming this works. Perfect. Can everybody see my screen? I'm seeing nods and thumbs up. Perfect. Okay, great. So this tool, we're going to start with the Draw My California Community tool. The Draw My Community tool, or my CA tool, was created by the statewide database to allow members of the public to submit COI, or COI maps rather, to the California Citizens Redistricting Commission for them to consider in their drafting of their maps. So by using this tool, you're giving the State Redistricting Commission the building blocks for creating their maps that they'll eventually adopt into district lines. You can also download what you create here to share it with your local government or commission. We'll get into that in a few seconds. So in fact, why don't we get into it now? So when you go to drawmycacommunity.org, mind the spelling, please. If somebody could drop that into chat, that would be very appreciated. But when you first log in, you'll be prompted with this screen here. The screen offers you to change the language if you're a non-English speaker, which is wonderful. It also gives you the option of giving a tutorial or sitting through a tutorial. For our purposes, we're not going to sit through that tutorial because I'm going to give you a live demonstration, but please do consider giving the tutorial or taking the tutorial in the future. So we'll click skip. The next slide we'll see, or the next section we'll see, is this login page. You have the option to either log in or continue as a guest. I recommend that you log in just because it will allow you to save all your work, to progress through the actual app, to come back and also share the information that you've created or share the map you've created with either your colleagues, members of the community, or even the State Redistricting Commission. And I will show you how to do that in just a second as well. So we're gonna log in for our purposes. You can enter your information. If you haven't done this before, you can also enter your new information and they'll help you log in as well. So we'll log in. You'll see that when we first log in, you're prompted with this map. Usually when you first log in, you'll see this. It'll be the outline of the state of California. You'll see mountains, you'll see highways, you'll see county lines, which are in gold. You'll see different areas of California, right? On your left, you'll see drafts that you've done in the past. If you've done areas in the past, you'll also see actual submissions that you've submitted to the commission before. If you haven't done anything before, whether it be maps or actually submitted something, this will be blank. For our particular purposes, we're going to go ahead and start a new map. Perfect. So before we start a new map, I want to bring up two things. So first, we're going to click this little Draw Your Community tool, right? And we'll get to these drawing tools in a second. But before we even do that, I want to alert you to this little feature down here, the base map style. Right now, you can see it's topographical, so you can see the mountain range. I think that's the Rockies. I'm not entirely sure. You can switch it to colorful, which will switch it to that. You can also switch it to terrain, which will do that. And my favorite, black and white. Perfect. So you can really get a good view of all the county outlines in gold here. And if you notice, the drawing layer here is listed counties and the bar is actually gold. Pay attention to that as I zoom in. So when you're drawing a new map, you obviously want to focus on your community. Being a resident of Los Angeles, California, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in to my area. Hello, hello, hello. Let's see if we can find me. Okay. Perfect. Oops. Sorry, my mouse is very sensitive. And it's fighting me. Perfect. So as you can see, as I was zooming in, this was changing as well. You see it's red to outline the census tracts. You'll see if I zoom out, it'll turn to blue to outline cities and towns. And then you'll see the gold line, which outlines counties. Sorry if you get nauseous, folks. But let's return to unincorporated East LA, an area of Los Angeles that is near and dear to my heart. Perfect. Let's go ahead and zoom in on this area here. Perfect. Perfect. So here we are in beautiful unincorporated East Los Angeles. I say it's unincorporated because it's not actually a city, it's just an area of the county known as unincorporated East Los Angeles. As you can see, if we change this to topographical, things will change. You'll see outlines of hills, mountains, things like that. You change it to terrain, you'll start to see some of the inlays. You'll see Roosevelt High School, Evergreen Cemetery, some major landmarks, see Hollenbeck Park, et cetera, right? Wonderful. So for our particular purposes, we're gonna wanna draw a new map. So let's say that we want to focus in on this particular area that's south of the 10. And I'm talking about this particular area right here. So if we wanted to draw a community, this is where these drawing tools would come in. First, you can move the map like I was doing earlier by clicking, going side to side, up and down, things like that. But if you want to actually draw areas, you can actually use this function which says add by clicking, and then just click and click and click and click. And that is your community that you're building out, right? And remember, while you're doing this process, you want to keep in mind everything that Janine taught us. You want to keep in mind all those questions. You want to keep in mind who are your neighbors, where do they work, what interests do we share, et cetera, et cetera. That's what's going to inform which blocks you include in your actual map. In addition, you have other options. You can add by rectangle, so you can actually draw rectangles if you want to do huge swaths of land. You can also do the lasso feature, which is if you wanted to include a large area like that. Oh, sometimes it does, there we go. Perfect, you can include large areas like that. So once you've done that, if you like, let's say you make a mistake as well, that's important to highlight. Let's say you added that, but you want to remove that. You can just click this little eraser tool. It says remove area, and then click the area that you mistakenly included. So once you've actually done that, you want to do the second step, which is actually describing your community. And this is key because this is where you have the opportunity to describe the community that you just built that's informed by you and your neighbor's interests, you know, what you enjoy, where you work, et cetera, everything that Janine laid out a few minutes ago. And you can actually give it a name so that the commission can see what you name your community. And you can actually give it a description to see what to inform the commission as to why this community should be considered one community of interest and shouldn't be broken up. So for our purposes, we're going to call this East LA commuters. And we're going to say that the shared interest that we have is that we all work in downtown LA. We all ride the metro. We take the bus, use the 10 freeway, which is north of us. Sorry for folks who aren't from Los Angeles and know these areas. Well, and that's really all there is. I mean, obviously this would take a lot more time. It would be a lot more thought out, but for our purposes here, this is how you can actually describe your community, how you can name your community, and how to build your community. If there's more information you want to include, I would encourage you to fill it out here as well as here. But once you've done that, you want to save your community, right? So it alerts you that you're creating a new draft map called East LA Commuters. Yes, I want to save that draft. Perfect. So you'll see that it comes up right here. It's my new map, East LA commuters, excuse me, not computers. You'll see unincorporated East LA, which is another draft map I have from previous presentations, et cetera, et cetera. The reason why I wanted to bring this up is because if we just, we can go back to the edit feature. Besides saving your map, you're going to want to submit it eventually, right? You're going to want to submit it to the California State Redistricting Commission. You're going to want them to see your work. So if you want to submit it, you click submit. You review what you've done. You'll just click this little button here. You'll fill out everything that's not optional. Click that, and then do that and click submit. Once you submit, and we'll click out of this. Once you submit, you'll get an email response from the system saying that your submission was successful and that the committee got it, or the commission got it. But you'll also get something that's extremely important. So another thing that you can do is you can actually export your map. Once it's done, you can click the export and you can actually download it as a PDF or a shapefile, which is extremely helpful if you're going to use this for local jurisdictions, although Districtor, which is the tool I'll demonstrate next, is very helpful for this as well for local jurisdictions. But you can download it, et cetera, et cetera. But as I was saying, once you've submitted it, you're going to be given, let's see if I can do this. You'll be given a printout that looks a lot like this in your email address. And I should have it still. Perfect. Perfect. Well, this isn't the one, but it'll work. I don't know if you can see this, where you'll see a little thing that says submission ID draft. This is actually critical if you're organizing around a particular map, because you can tell the commission, look, I support or I don't support submission ID map 07132021, et cetera, et cetera. Or you can tell them that you support it. So this is a great little tool. Perfect. So that's Draw My CA Community. I'm going to switch over really quickly to Districtor. So Districtor is a very, very similar presentation, or tool rather. It's the same tool, except it allows you, and it's more locally based, but it allows you to draw your map, to turn COI testimony into actual literal maps for different commissions, whether it be at the city, the county, the special jurisdictions, or the state level. It allows you to draw a map, build your community, and then submit it to them as well. It's completely free. The other tool is also completely free. So when you load Districtor, this is the homepage. You'll see all this helpful information, which is all information that you've had before in this presentation and even before that. But what we want to focus on is this little function down here, the jump to map, or the map function. You can also get here by clicking the jump to map function. So you'll just jump to the map because we are in California. We chose California. And for our purposes, because we're going to be drawing a community, we're going to click Draw Communities. That's going to limit our options quite a bit, actually. And you'll see that we only have one real option, which is the California, identify a community built out of block or block groups. So we're going to go ahead and click that. And while that's loading, oh, it loaded pretty quickly, actually. Okay, perfect. So while that's loading, you'll see a similar screen as you did with the Draw My CA Community. You'll also realize that it's very similar to Apple Maps. It's very similar to Google Maps. It's very similar to Waze or other locational apps you may use when getting around town. But you'll see this screen. One thing I want to highlight that's a little bit different than Draw My CA Community is this little search bar. It allows you to search. You can search landmarks. You can search addresses, actual longitude and latitude, et cetera, et cetera. So for our purposes, we're going to focus on another city that's near and dear to my heart, Montebello, California, which is right outside of unincorporated East LA. Perfect. So while it's loading, I'll take you to this area over here. So on the right-hand side, you'll see a layout that's similar to the Draw My CA Community. You'll see the Move the Map tool. You'll see a Paint tool, which we'll use in a second. You'll see erasers for any mistakes you do. And then you can see the Zoom button. We'll talk about these other buttons in a second, but for our purposes, we're going to focus on Montebello, California. So let's zoom in a little bit to get a little bit more of a closer and more intimate view. Perfect. So you can see Montebello City Hall, you can see Montebello Intermediate School, Montebello High School, et cetera, St. John's Lutheran Church. You can see major landmarks. So one of the key differences between this and Draw My CA Community is that this has a very local feel. So you're going to want to choose landmarks or think about landmarks or areas or city intersections, whether it be between Lincoln and Beverly, whether it be between Beverly and Madison, et cetera, that actually represent your community. The reason I say that is because, well, let's dive in. The first step when building out your community map is to go down to this Important Places tab, click New, and then choose landmarks or areas that make up your community. Remember those questions that Janine asked? That could be Acuna Park, for instance. Once we put the little dot there, as I just did, and you left click it, this screen is going to be brought up and you'll see it's labeled as Community 1, which is our overall umbrella label. But you can actually name this and call it Acuna Park or Acuna Park. I don't know why it's missing the Enye. So once we name it, we want to describe it. Remember in Draw My CA, community, how we describe the interests that we shared with the areas that we highlighted. Well, we got to do that here too. So why is this area important to us? Well, this is where all the social functions are held. Sports leagues for kids are here. Montebello City Hall has their functions here. Graduations for schools are here. You know, everyone in this area, everyone in around the park works in the same downtown Montebello, I'll abbreviate, area. Perfect. So you're gonna wanna do this about 10 to 15 times. But for our purposes, we're gonna do it just 2 more times. So we're gonna do the same thing. So we chose Acuna Park last time. We'll zoom out again. And maybe we'll choose Sure High School, which is right up here. Same thing, you'll see that it says new point 2. You'll see new point 2 is generated down here. We're gonna say the same thing, Sure High School. We'll say everyone in Montebello attends, unless they go to Montebello High School, but that's another point. So now we have 2 points. Perfect, let's do it one more time, and we'll put it right at the corner of Montebello and Beverly, Montebello Boulevard and Beverly Boulevard. Perfect, you'll see it generated a new point. So we generated a new point 3. We're gonna name it Shopping Center, because this is where most people in Montebello do their shopping. And we're gonna talk about how it has a community conference area. It has local coffee shops where everybody gets together. It has a lot of shopping. It has some city service buildings. Perfect. So now that we've named it, we've marked it, and we've described it, we're actually going to want to draw our community like we did in my CA. And that's where this little tool comes in. See what I did? I clicked the little paintbrush. It brings up the brush size, all this important information down here. You're going to want to drop this down to 1. Just trust me on that. And then you're going to want to start painting your community. So look, we have an overlapping block here. We have an overlapping, or we have a block here. We have, let's say, the people in this area also go to the shopping center and also go to Acuna Park. We can say that this area is also part of my community. If we wanted to differentiate communities, like we wanted to say these areas are much different than my community, we can choose a different color by clicking the plus, and it'll generate a new community and it'll label it as such. And one little key trick, you can move over to the data layers and click show community numbers, and it'll generate these numbers, which helps the commission, understand what's part of your community and what's not. Okay, perfect. So once you have your community laid out like this, you can start playing with the data layers as I just showed you. You can have county boundaries if you'd like. You can show Native American reservations. If you're part of a coalition, if you're part of a group that's working with different coalitions, whether it be Latinos, African Americans, white, et cetera, you can add the demographics for each group to your community and to the other communities that you built out, right? And you can see that generating down here. You can also click show population. You can really get into the nitty gritty and the weeds, but I'm gonna skip that for now. And then finally, when you're done, you can click evaluation and you can start seeing the breakdown of the community you actually built, which is helpful for us as grass tops and community leaders, because this is key information that we're gonna wanna review. But before you're done, before you're finished with this, you wanna submit it to the local commission, right? Whether it be the city, the special district, the county, or maybe somebody else, right? Well, first you're gonna wanna save it. You click this little button at the top that says save. It's gonna generate its own individual URL, which you can then forward either to friends, family. You can forward it to different members of the commission, or not the commission, excuse me, different members of your coalition, different members of your group, et cetera, so they can see what you built out, and they can even edit it as well. So you can just copy that and use this little copy function. You can also name it if it's part of a coalition community map. Same thing here. The final thing is that, what's the point of all this? You're gonna wanna submit this to your local commission, right? To your local redistricting commission. In order to do that, you're gonna wanna click this little hamburger button down here. Perfect, it's gonna bring up this little menu here. You'll see that you also have an option of printing it or drafting it as a PDF. But you also have these options. These options are extremely helpful when submitting it to local commissions, because these options will allow you to submit it in the format that your local commission is accepting. So this is something that you're going to want to follow up with your local commission and see what format they would prefer it in. And I believe that that is it. Any questions?
Thanks, Jose. Great work. We have one question for you, which is, or we have maybe a couple questions for you, but one of them is, can you again just reiterate which of those two tools is meant for the state commission and which of them is meant for the local jurisdictions? And what is, in both of them, let's say we wanted to submit to our county board of supervisors or our city council, how would we do that?
Sure. And to answer the first question first, there we go. To answer the first question first, the Draw My CA community tool, the very first one I showed, and I'll drop it into chat in a few seconds, or if somebody else can do that, that would be great. But the very first tool I showed is specifically for the California Citizens Redistricting Commission, the state level. You can use the maps you generated there on a local level, but you can also use Districtor. Districtor is much more helpful when you're submitting to a local jurisdiction, whether it be a city council, whether a county, whether it be a special jurisdiction like here in the city of Los Angeles, we have LA Unified School District. You want to use Districtor for those particular jurisdictions. To answer the second question, in order to submit it to your individual commission, whether it be the state, the county, city council, or a special district, you're going to want to follow up with that particular individual jurisdiction. Every jurisdiction has, and I'll say with an exception of the state, and I'll get to that in a second, but every jurisdiction has different ways of submitting COI testimony and actual COI community maps like we just showed you. It could be via email, it could be via public comment form that allows attachments, et cetera, et cetera. So you're going to want to go to your individual commission's website, see which forms they prefer it in, and then follow up that way. With the state commission, when you use Draw My CA Communities tool, the very first tool I outlined, the one that was like very gold and white, once you're done, once you click the submit button, it goes directly to the state commission. So you don't need to fuss about emailing or how do I submit it, et cetera, et cetera. It'll go directly once you fill out all the information, and you'll get a receipt via email with a copy of the map that you actually submitted.
So Jose, can we talk a little bit about why some jurisdictions have more detail on Districtor than others? And specifically, Pam asks, if a demographer in a particular city is using Districtor.org as one of their tools, does that mean that Districtor will automatically have more detail for that jurisdiction?
So Districtor, so one of the things I should have mentioned at the front is Districtor is actually a public tool that's provided by the folks over at Tufts University. What that means is that they're providing it free of charge. It has information from various areas, whether it be the Census Bureau or ACS, as Jonathan outlined a little bit earlier in our presentation. I think somebody alluded to this question a little bit earlier as well in terms of asking Districtor to upload LA City or LA, I forget if it was LA City or LA County information. But if somebody is using Districtor as their mapping tool, if a jurisdiction is using Districtor as their mapping tool, then I would still follow up with them in terms of how you can submit it to them. As far as I know, Districtor doesn't have a feature that allows you to submit it directly to a jurisdiction. Maybe they customize it for that particular jurisdiction. A lot of jurisdictions do reach out to Districtor and ask them for presentations and custom information, et cetera, et cetera. So again, I'm going to refer you to that particular jurisdiction's website, see what their directions are. And if their directions are not clear, email them. Always email, ask for clarification.
So I just put in the chat, if you go to the Districtor homepage, excuse me, if you go to the Districtor homepage, if you scroll down, it basically says, if you'd like to customize Districtor to your jurisdiction, use our request form. There's a link. The request form is actually a link, or you can email them. And so if you want more detail in Districtor for your jurisdiction, reach out to Districtor. Okay, last question. Lori, there was a question from above. Valerie said, you know, it was essentially a question about a public transit system and which level of government operates that transit system, because Valerie uses that transit system and wants to make sure that communities of interest around the transit system are recognized in redistricting. That gives rise to sort of a deeper set of questions that I'm going to hand to you now.
Yeah, it's a really great question, because, you know, I think your community of interest could be the same for all levels of government, right? You're mapping your community of interest, but what Valerie's pointing out is, how do you tie your issues for your community to whatever level of government may be addressing those? And I know Jonathan and I talked about this, like calling your state senator about the pothole on your street isn't going to get your pothole fixed, right? Because they don't deal with that. So figuring out, and I don't know the answer to your question regarding the metro. I would imagine it's probably funded by all, there's probably funding from all levels of government for that in some form or another, but tailoring so your community, you know, map your community of interest and then think about why the issues that are impacting it are connected to either your local representation, your state, or your federal representation. But it could be the same for all. And I think that makes it a little less daunting when you think about, okay, I have a community of interest that we work to map. We want to present it in a variety of contexts, but we may tweak the testimony a little bit depending upon which jurisdiction we're talking to. Did that answer? Hopefully that answered.
Yeah, thanks, Lori. We can always go deeper if need be. Because we're a little bit behind schedule, I'm gonna move this on to our next presenter. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, look, it's me. So I'm gonna skip my introduction. I'm the Executive Director at California Common Cause. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so we are gonna talk about some red flags to look for in the redistricting process. I don't want to bore you with yet another presentation about redistricting law. I've given tons of those. And if you haven't seen one and you want to nerd out on redistricting law, I mean, Godspeed, that is so important. And just contact Common Cause and we will get you those PowerPoints or a video of one of those trainings. But what I'm going to do today is present this information in a simpler way. What should you be looking for? What should raise an eyebrow? What should you treat as a red flag if you're engaging in a redistricting process at your city or county or school board and you see something going on, right? What should be a warning sign that causes you to bring in experts or lawyers or something of that kind? All right, we're going to start with red flags in the line drawing process. First and foremost, is a very large community of color being completely ignored by the line drawers? Are they being erased from the process, right? One way this might happen is that a large community of color is being split into a lot of different districts instead of being kept whole within a district. If you see a situation where a community of color is 35% or 25% of 3 different districts, when you know they could be drawn such that they're 55% of one district, and in that district, because they're 55%, have the ability to influence the outcome of elections in that district, that might be a red flag. That's sometimes called cracking. Alternatively, if that community of color is being grouped really concentratedly, that's a word I just made up, into one district, so that you know they could be 55% of 2 districts, but they're being made so that they're 80% of one district, and they'll be able to elect representation in one district when they could elect it in 2. That's another red flag, okay? So is a community of color being completely ignored, or is a community of color being manipulated so as to minimize their voting power? Those are red flags to look out for. Next slide. So the Fair Maps Act has been referred to a couple times today. The Fair Maps Act was a law passed by California Common Cause and a wide range of civic engagement and civil rights partners in 2019 that creates new rules for local redistricting. I've talked about this in other contexts, and hopefully you're familiar with it a little bit. It creates a set of ranked criteria that have to be followed when cities and counties draw district lines. One thing cities have to do is they have to keep neighborhoods whole. Now, it's not the highest ranked criteria, and so they could argue theoretically that they have to crack a neighborhood in half in order to achieve higher priorities, like satisfying the Federal Voting Rights Act. That's fair. But keeping neighborhoods together is a pretty high ranked pretty high ranked criteria. And so if you see it, that should raise an eyebrow. Counties under the law are required to keep cities together. So if you see a city being cracked in half, that should raise an eyebrow. I'm not saying that a county splitting up a city or a city splitting up a neighborhood is an automatic violation of the law, but it has to be justified through compliance with higher ranked criteria, and you should investigate what's going on. Another one is a city or a county splitting up or just straight up ignoring a community of interest when that community of interest has come forward with tons of testimony and documentation. So if one person comes and says, my community of interest are people who are, bikers who use this particular green space and bike routes, and then there's a ton of other community of interest on all sorts of other subjects, and the line drawer ultimately does not keep the bike routes together in one district, that may be legitimate because there was so much other community of interest testimony on so many other communities, and there was just one person who came forward and talked about bike routes. But if there are lots and lots and lots of people coming forward and giving powerful testimony about a community of interest, and then that community of interest, when the lines get drawn, is completely ignored or split up, that's a red flag, and you want to look for it. Okay, next slide. There's another thing that happens where compactness or drawing simple geometric shapes becomes treated like a really important criteria in the redistricting process, when in fact, it's a very low-ranked criteria and it should not be used as justification for disempowering communities. So let's talk a little bit more about why this happens. Okay, it happens. People don't know redistricting all that well, including people like city council members and county boards of supervisors who are responsible for drawing district lines. They don't know this in an in-depth way. And what they have heard about it is that long squiggly districts, or districts with funny corners, or districts with weird edges, or districts that have interesting, curious, weird-looking shapes, those are gerrymandering, and those are bad. The reality is that communities don't live in simple geometric shapes. And while sometimes a funny-looking district with squiggly lines is actually an attempt to disenfranchise, or is actually an attempt to keep a city council member's house in the district they've always run for election in, sometimes that squiggly district is really just honoring communities where they live on the ground, because communities live in odd shapes. They don't choose their houses or their apartments so that they live in a rectangle, okay? So if you hear line drawers saying, no, we can't listen to that community, we can't include their church in with their district, or we can't include their community center in with their district, because that would create weird shapes, and we want to have simple lines, that's a sign that compactness and following easily identifiable boundaries is being placed above communities of interest, and that should be a red flag that you look out for. Okay, and let's go to the next slide. Another thing, empowering political parties or empowering one political party or disempowering another political party through district lines is called partisan gerrymandering, and it is not legal under California law. So if you can tell that the district lines are being drawn to maximize the power of Democrats or to maximize the power of Republicans, that is, you have to look into it deeper, but that might be partisan gerrymandering, and that is now not legal under the Fair Maps Act from 2019. So if you see that or you sense that's what's going on, it's time to dig deeper into that. And then there's a different issue, but related, where instead of trying to empower Democrats or empower Republicans, they're trying to keep incumbents in their current districts so they can run for re-election easily, or they're trying to keep incumbents from ending up in the same district together so they would have to run against one another, right? And these are sort of incumbency protection shenanigans happen all the time. Unfortunately, this is an area where the law does not speak strongly and conclusively that this is not legal, but it cannot be done if it violates the other criteria, or for example, if you are slicing and dicing a community of interest in order to keep an incumbent in their existing district and able to run for election easily, that's a violation of the Fair Maps Act, and that's something that should raise a red flag. So let's move to the next slide. What do you do about it if you see some of these things happening? The first is you want to gather specific evidence, right? You want to be able to say, here's a bad map and here's 7 good maps that would have kept this community whole. They ignored all 7. Or you want to note comments from a city council member or a supervisor, that sort of gives up the game, lets you know what they're actually trying to do. and then take that specific evidence to redistricting experts or civil rights lawyers, right? So I've listed some groups that do this work here: Asian Americans Advancing Justice, MALDEF, NALEO, Black Census and Redistricting Hub, ACLU. You want to take this to lawyers who know the law well and get their advice. Next slide. Now, I want to move to red flags in the redistricting process as opposed to red flags in the line drawing, right? So like, what is the city doing or your county doing to actually, in the process? So next slide. The first things is, if they don't do any community outreach, and they don't do any community outreach to limited English-speaking communities, they don't outreach to ethnic media, those are red flags. And if it's impossible to find information online about the redistricting process, about hearing dates, you can't find notes from previous hearings, you can't find draft maps, those are all potential violations of the Fair Maps Act, and that's a red flag to look out for. Next slide. If there are fewer than 4 hearings in which the public can give testimony, that's a problem. If the hearings are not ADA accessible to people with disabilities, that's a problem. If hearings are not, there's no language translation, and you know there's a very large community of speakers of a language other than English in your city or in your county, that's a problem. And if there's no notice, or just 1 day's notice, for example, of community of interest hearings, those are all problems. Go to the next slide. What do you do about those situations? Again, gather specific evidence. And at that point, you want to contact redistricting experts with lawyers and take that evidence to them. I've listed the same civil rights groups as before, but also there are a number of other groups that are monitoring the process to make sure the process is inclusive, it's accessible, it actually works for regular community members. That includes Common Cause, the League of Women Voters, Advancement Project California, and some others. And so you can take it to a wider range of groups. Let's go to the next slide. Lastly, I want to talk about red flags for independent commissions. Next slide. If your city council members or county supervisors are trying to interfere with the independent commission and get lines drawn the way they want, even though an independent commission is supposed to be in control of the process, that's a red flag. Or if your city or county staff, remember, of course, the city and county staff, at the end of the day, they work for your city council or for your county board of supervisors. If they're trying to steer meetings in a particular way, or they're trying to steer commission decisions really aggressively, or in particular, in a way that would result in the commission recreating the status quo, that's a red flag. Or if the city attorney or county council is giving advice to the commission that slants the commission's decisions in a way that favors incumbents or favors status quo districts, those are problems as well. And in there, you want to talk to all the same groups that I've listed in previous slides. Let's move to the next slide. And that's all I have. I know I did that quickly. There's a number of questions here that I'm gonna take now, but we're short on time. We have just a few minutes here for questions. One question is, what if there are community members that are showing up and saying, please leave everything the same? That is a form of community testimony, and that is valid. If you want to see change, Lori mentioned this earlier, in some ways, redistricting can turn into a turnout game. Whoever can mobilize more people giving testimony in favor of a particular district or a particular approach, they might win the day. And so if people are showing up in large numbers and saying, we like our districts, just keep them the way they are, that's legitimate, and that's a force to be reckoned with. What if a neighborhood is segregated or exclusive? Are we still required to keep them whole? So this is let's say there's a very high income area or a gated community, and there's a history of redlining in the area, and you know exactly what the ugly history is of why that community looks the way that it does. Does it still need to be kept whole in the process? According to the law, neighborhoods and communities of interest are to be kept whole in the redistricting process. There is no specification of particular kinds of communities or treating one set of communities one way and another set of communities another way. And then last question, is partisan gerrymandering indicated by how many registered Dems or Republicans or by voter turnout? The answer is there's no simple answers here. There is no one simple definition of partisan gerrymandering, and the federal courts, in fact, including the Supreme Court, have just basically punted on this question of how to regulate partisan gerrymandering. Partisan gerrymandering is illegal under California state law, under a law that's only 2 years old. And so there's a lot we don't know about how to police partisan gerrymandering in California. The only thing I can say now is that if a map very clearly disempowers one political party and makes it very hard for them to elect representation and very clearly empowers the other political party, at the very least, we should look further into that. I can't guarantee that would be a case of partisan gerrymandering we could take to court, but at the very least, it's worth looking into further. That's a very new area of law, and so there's a lot of open questions. Okay, with that, I recognize there may be more questions, but we're at time for my section. Thank you all for listening. I'm going to hand it back over to Jose, who will now, let's go to the next slide. And I'm not sure if I'm frozen or if the screen is frozen, but I'm going to hand it over to Jose so he can get started.
Sure, it looks like we're having a little bit of technical difficulty. So while they sort that out, I'll go ahead and get started. So now that we've learned a few key lessons, about the overall process, we've learned about what COI testimony is, we've learned about the red flags that we need to watch out for. We want to make sure that you that you actually walk away from this training with the tools and resources necessary to not only apply these lessons, but also feel comfortable teaching others within your organization, within your membership, or really the members of the public at large. So first, when applying these lessons, you're going to want to first find out all the information you can about the jurisdiction that's redistricting. We've mentioned it a few times during this actual presentation, but the first step really, and when we get that slide back up, looks like we're perfect. So the first step is really looking at the individual jurisdiction that you're trying to target. Perfect. Thank you so much, Alvin. That's the right slide. So for me personally, I live in Los Angeles, California. So the jurisdictions that are currently redistricting or redrawing their lines are California State, LA County, LA City, and special districts. These are the ones that apply to me most directly because I'm a resident of Los Angeles. My kids one day might go to LAUSD. I'm also a resident of the county. I'm also a resident of California State. So this is really your first step when identifying resources and materials. You want to go here. You want to find out what the deadlines are, what the timelines are, what materials the actual jurisdiction offers. They might offer promotional materials that might help you put together COI events. They might offer a timeline that's a really nice graphic or PowerPoints, et cetera, et cetera. I know LA County is a good example of that. And if you could, Alvin, switch to the next slide when you get a chance. Perfect, perfect. But besides the jurisdiction websites, what other resources are available to you? Well, that's where Charge Hub comes in. First, if you want to access more trainings, materials, and have a real deeper dive into the redistricting process and all of its sections, you're going to want to revisit or revisit, if you have already, the Redistricting Community College series, which you can by just going to the website listed on the actual slide, redistrictingcommunitycollege.com. They offer a whole host of materials, trainings, webinars, recordings, things that you can use to train your memberships, to train your colleagues, to get more information. And in fact, I actually highlighted about 3 additional trainings that are coming up, which everyone in this training should definitely sign up for. If you're interested in signing up for those trainings, you just have to go to that link, redistrictingcommunitycollege.com. And there'll be a link and a step-by-step process that'll walk you through registering and RSVPing. The other thing I want to mention is that traditionally redistricting has been a secretive and exclusive process. Charge and Charge Hub, which stands for the Coalition Hub Advancing Redistricting and Grassroots Engagement, is a collection of 9 orgs, including Common Cause, that are committed to empowering folks who have intentionally been excluded from voting in electoral politics to ensure that they have a seat at the redistricting table. So they're a great group of organizations, and I definitely think you should check them out if you haven't already. Next slide. Perfect. So I mentioned Charge Hub. Charge Hub is a group of 9 orgs that are working all across the nation in redistricting. California is not the only state redistricting and drawing their new lines. You have states all across the US that are going through the same process. You have jurisdictions all across the US, cities, counties, special jurisdictions, et cetera, et cetera. So Charge Hub really had to make their materials generalized to fit for every single jurisdiction out there. But what do you as a California organization, as a CBO, as a member of a CBO, have at your disposal that's very localized for California? Well, that's where California Common Cause comes in. So on the slide in front of you, you'll see California Common Cause's website, which should be working now, I'm told. And you'll see a link to the local redistricting 2021 resources. So let's go ahead and give it a shot. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Perfect. Can everybody see that? So assuming the link that someone's gonna drop in chat for you works, you should come to this particular page, which is the resources that California Common Cause has for local redistricting. And when we say local, we mean statewide. It could be resources for Los Angeles, San Diego, the Bay Area, the Northern area, Central Valley, Central Coast, et cetera, et cetera. So when you first come to this website, this is what you'll be prompted with. It'll give you an explanation and a helpful list of all the documents that are actually included in on this webpage, excuse me. If you scroll down, you'll start to see the materials that are available to you. Now, one of those materials Janine eloquently outlined and put on her slides was the template for community interest testimony. That's this template here. Rather than clicking it and risking a WordPress issue, I'm gonna go ahead and show you what it looks like here. So once you click that button, this is what will come up. You'll see a template. You'll see different ways of drafting your COI testimony. Hi, my name is Jose. I lived in this community, et cetera, et cetera. You'll see a lot of the questions that Janine so eloquently outlined for us. And then you'll see a template script, putting it all together. You'll see some questions that'll help you through the COI testimonial process, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a really helpful document, and I really encourage you to look at it. And this is a little bit of a closer look. Perfect. And we'll get to that document in a second. But if you want that COI template, it's right here under the materials, redistricting materials made by California Common Cause, along with a lot of the other materials we've referenced in chat today. You see that the trainer Jonathan mentioned. You see a local redistricting 101 fact sheet. Another document I want to highlight is actually a new document that we put together, and that's this social media toolkit here. If you click it, and rather than click it, I'm going to go ahead and just load this screen. If you click that box, it'll bring up this screen, which is just a social media toolkit that you can use when inviting and mobilizing your community, whether it be your membership, whether it be actual neighborhoods, whether it be your colleagues, so on and so forth. So you just click these links and you'll be given samples of invitations that you can go ahead and fill out. You can doctor, you can add information in for all sorts of events that are going to be occurring through the redistricting process. One thing that I really love about this is that, one, it's completely free. All you need is a Canva account, which just requires an email and a name. And you can figure all that out by just clicking these links, these hyperlinks here. But one thing I really love is that we actually have these flyers and invitations available in Spanish. This is something that was mentioned earlier in the presentation. We have this available in Spanish. We also have that template I just showed you. That is also available in Spanish on our website, free of charge for everyone in this presentation to view. So those are two cool tools that you can use. If you scroll down, you'll see some other materials that are available in Spanish. If there are materials that you'd like to see that are already in English, or maybe that you'd like to see us add, feel free to reach out to me and I'll tell you how in just a second. But if there are materials you'd like to see in Spanish, please reach out to us. Let us know what the community needs, what the community wants, and we can see what we can do to assist. But you see a lot of our tools that we have translated already. And we also work as part of a coalition. Folks, we never want to reinvent the wheel, right? When the redistricting process comes along, it's important to rely on our partners, whether it be MALDEF, whether it be PANA, who's co-hosting this particular training, whether it be any other of the wonderful organizations that Jonathan outlined in his presentation. Look, you never want to reinvent the wheel, and a lot of our partners throughout the state have already put together wonderful materials for us to use. So you can see those materials here. You can see some other materials we've collected here, but this is really what I wanted to highlight. In chat, a couple folks wanted to know where Janine got that particular COI testimony that she mentioned, and it's right here. You can see it on our local redistricting website. You can see this YouTube video, and you can play it, you can listen to it, you can download a transcription of it, and then we have this second one as well that's available as well for you to listen to. So it gives you a real good example of what good COI testimony looks like. We also have some of those trainings that Jonathan mentioned if you want to do a deeper dive. If you want to learn a little bit more about redistricting and you want more video, if you're more visual, and you want a video presentation, this is where you'd want to go. Perfect. And I think that's just about it here. I'm going to end sharing my screen. I'd have one more slide after this, as soon as I can find. There we go. Alvin, if we could go to my last slide before the questions. Perfect. So the last thing I want to present you guys with is this. It's a familiar name if you haven't heard it already, but I am the local redistricting advocate for California Common Cause. California Common Cause is a great organization. It's made all of its materials or most of its materials available on our website already, and we're constantly developing new materials and new ways to support our partners and to support organizations and members of the community throughout the state. So in that light, I want to offer myself as a contact. Make sure to write down my email address, which is on the slide at the very top next to my name. Write it down. If you have a question about this presentation, if you have a question about materials on our website, if you have a question about your jurisdiction, if you want to request a presentation like this or Redistricting 101 for your particular organization or community, reach out to me. The other way that I'm going to make myself available is that following this training, everybody will get an invitation along with a recording of this training and the slides for this training. But you'll get an invitation to what we're having as local redistricting advocates office hours. It's just a time that I'm going to set apart for my schedule to meet with anyone who has questions, to meet with anyone who wants to get involved. And these questions can range from, I don't know what redistricting is, to, I've done this for 5 cycles already, and I just need help with this, acute research question, things like that. So make sure to reach out to me. You'll get an invitation and more information in the email that follows this presentation. The other thing that we wanted to do is that, look, there's several organizations that are in the audience tonight, several of which we worked with before, several new organizations and new partners that we might work with in the future. Look, if you have any questions or you want a presentation for your organization, please do reach out to me at that email and just let me know. We can work with you, we can set up a time. So yeah, thank you so much. Do we have any questions?
Folks, feel free to put questions about the resources, about the office hours, any requests for Spanish translation or what translation to other languages in the chat. We can handle it. I'm going to use this opportunity while people are putting their questions in the chat to answer a question that was raised a while back. Someone asked, why are some districts so much less populous than other districts? How do we get districts that are sort of out of whack in population? Well, there's the normal forms of population change, right? You've got babies are born, people pass away, folks move, et cetera. But there's other shifts in population that are driven by policies and driven by leadership. Displacement because of housing affordability crisis may mean that certain people are leaving neighborhoods they've lived in for decades and relocating to other parts of the state. That can lead to population shifts of a really serious kind. Some places might be building housing and other places aren't building housing. That leads to population shifts of a really significant kind. Or a city or a county might be saying, you know what, we are going to build new housing, but we're only going to build it in these neighborhoods. And by building it only in those neighborhoods, you're adding the population growth in those neighborhoods, right? And so that's the imbalance that occurs over the course of a decade and why redistricting is necessary. There was a question, Karina asked, are the resources available in Punjabi? Right now, we don't have any resources in Punjabi, but we have partners in the Punjabi community who we could work with on making that happen. So please follow up with Jose and we will talk more about that. If there are no other questions, I'm going to ask Alvin to go to the last slide. And please do feel free to throw questions out there, folks. That's totally fine. I just want to say a huge thank you to the California Common Cause team that helped make today happen, and to PANA for their partnership on this, and a huge thank you in particular to Janine for her work, and our efforts to get everybody educated on how this works. We are really grateful to have the opportunity to speak to all of you today. We recognize this work is hard, it's complicated, it's difficult, and it is something in which you have to educate your community members on this once-in-a-decade topic that involves a whole bunch of new terminology, a bunch of new data, a bunch of new technology. We get that it's hard, and we're here to do everything we can to help. And so please reach out anytime you have anything you need or you think there's anything you need. I would also sign up for, if you'd like, you can sign up for our email list at commoncause.org/California, and you'll get updates about our work, including updates about our redistricting resources. We also have a local redistricting email list that we update periodically, and so email Jose if you want to be added to that as well. I'm going to give it one more second here to see if there's any other questions. If not, we are going to wrap up today. Thank you for giving us 2 hours out of your afternoon. Jose just put his email in chat, so that's, please save that. Yeah, absolutely. Bombard him with emails, questions, requests for translation, or anything under the sun. Please keep Jose's email handy, and you can use it throughout the year. All right, folks. I'm not seeing any questions, so we're going to wrap up. Thank you again for giving us 2 hours of your afternoon today. Have a great afternoon, and good luck with the redistricting process ahead.